Okay, if people if people can't see the slides changing, just give me a heads up, okay? Um, and yeah, hi everyone. It's great to be here with you today. This is a hit and run provocation, and I mean it's really hit and run. So um, I was trying to think of something around this notion of dislocation. And so it's a brief meditation on what I call the extensions. Some people will call them the suburbs, some will call them the hinterlands, some will call them the periphery, some will call them something else. It's a little bit of everything. But yet the notion of the extensions. And why, one of the reasons why I'm particularly interested in the extensions is because the urban as the kind of locus of a certain modernity, the urban as the platform through which humans were able to demonstrate a sense of their potency, of consolidating their abilities to affect and be affected. Um, this role of the urban is diminishing, particularly as the more salient registers rescale to the planetary level and also to a kind of the microscopic level. So the urban itself is being fundamentally dislocated, displaced from its central role as a kind of consolidation of the technicities of modernity. And in a sense, uh, as I say here, that a sense of techno-semiotic calculation constricts the operations of politics as we're familiar with them. Politics is a means of constituting free citizens that have been long affiliated with the city. And as such, then to use Keller Easterly's term about new interplays, that is, new kinds of intersections amongst registers are required as a means of multiplying entanglements amongst things, the relations of mutual implication. And in some sense, the extensions, what I mean by the extensions is not a fractal replication of format or formula. It's not the city reproducing itself or extending itself according to the same logics, but it becomes a kind of locus of entanglement, where valuation is exhibited largely through the capacity to rearrange things, rearrangements of densities, durations, uses, affordances, and collective socialization. So coming back to this notion of the urban as a kind of locus of the modern, um, in a very brief way, that modernity entailed a subjection to perspectivism. Okay, uh, the way in which the individual was separated out from the social body as the premise of the vanishing point, that is, from which the perspectivism is imposed and the city congeals as a kind of unified entity. And perspectivism introduces the notions of the uniformity, identity of constituent elements, the logic of the orthogonal, the equidistant, um, and basically where the geometry of power is expressed in the very material form of the urban. So this move to separate out individual from a kind of collective social body. And in contrast, then using the notion of Denise Ferreira da Silva, that spaciousness as difference without separability. So in contrast to the separating out, how do you imagine a kind of a topography where differences may be detached, but they're not separable? And in some sense, they're not separable, not because there's some overarching frame that ties them all together. It's not what I'm talking about. There's no kind of overarching logical sense that makes all these differences have sense, but rather a locus where differences avail to each other the very conceptual and material resources that enables them to be different. And so what I'm saying then is that the extensions become a modality of spaciousness through which one can imagine and even begin to concretize a sense of this kind of notion of differences without separability. And in a way, when one begins to look at the kinds of extensions of major mega urban regions, such as Delhi and Jakarta, where those that I'm most familiar with, there are ways in which all kinds of instruments and technicities and actors and spatial products do circulate through each other. And also in a way in which it's very hard to tell the efficacy of any built environment or any spatial project, because they all exude a sense of being half full and half empty. So you never have a sense of them working on their own terms, that somehow their viability and their operability always depends upon some kind of infusion of difference, something from external to its own vernaculars and logics that enable any individual spatial product or built environment to work. So in some sense, then what actors bank upon is not viability or profitability in the moment, but a sense that eventually things will work out. Not according to what they imagine or not according to the terms in which things were originally built, but somehow that at some point there will be a kind of usefulness, and that in some sense everything that exists is always in some sense pitched to the anticipation of this kind of speculative sense of usefulness. And therefore the plan, even though plans will specify the precise ways in which different spatial products are to be interrelated, but the plan also builds on the obsolescence of those very specifications. So when built environments don't work, build more, change the neighborhood. And so there is this sense within the extensions of this notion of materializing off-grid relations. And these relations are not conducted within the register of realizing some sense of unexpected potentialities. Rather, it functions as an intensive artificiality, even noise, a means of interrelating things not informed by a specific vision or even an objective. So we come a long way from the kind of imagination of the modernist modernist city. That is, at the extensions, what becomes increasingly important is the infusion of incomputable instrumentality in the intersection, for example, of the everyday experiences of hundreds of service workers and laborers across the landscape characterized by moving things around, constantly improvising where they might fit, disrupt, and supplement operations of any kind. So in conclusion, why I think that the extensions are a kind of locus of dislocation is that just beyond what has customarily been purported to be the real city, that it's increasingly evident that a continuous recalibration of projects, material inputs, and residues, and altered ecologies of reciprocal causation are generating landscapes that exceed the salience of available vernaculars of analysis and intervention. So far from being manifestations necessarily of neoliberal logics, formulas of spatial products, which they are, which in many respects they are, there's also their existence as something that which our language hasn't yet caught up. Our conceptualizations have not yet caught up because of the dependency upon a whole substrate of what I call inoperable relations that are necessary in order to make them somehow functional in the present. So for me, this is a kind of exemplification of a kind of contemporary dislocation, and I'll leave it there.